talk.
Waking up to ash and dust. I wipe my brow and I sweat my rust. I'm breathing in the chemicals. I'm breaking in, shaping up, then checking out on the prison bus. This is it, the apocalypse. Whoa.
Hi, everyone. This is James from Disaster Survival Network. This podcast, we have the pleasure of talking with Jim Phillips from Safe Harbor Alliance, and that's safeharboralliance.com. And we will make sure that we put that in the show notes for you, as well as Jim's any social media. Mr. Phillips, how are you tonight? Glad to have you on the show.
Well, I am terrific, and thanks for the opportunity of being here.
Great. For our listeners, Jim has a website, again, called safeharboralliance.com. He's very deep into prepping and has been for years, offers numerous different products as far as preparedness goes. One of them that I personally have tried out is the cold weather gear, which up in the Northeast, the Old Farmer's Almanac is predicting the worst winter in history. So you definitely want to check out safeharboralliance.com and get yourself a set of that cold weather gear. Jim, before we talk about the specific products that you sell, can you tell us a little bit of the who, what, where, when, why, and how of how and why you got involved in preparedness, and tell us your background, please.
Well, I just grew up doing many of the things. My family was always camping and backpacking, and we started anytime we went on vacation, there was no hotels. It was the side of the road or under a tarp or someplace. And that's how I grew up in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s in our family. And as I continued on into adulthood and family, I just kept doing those kinds of things. But as an early, when I was first married, within a year or so of being married, started a small family, and somebody just mentioned to me, it's kind of like, well, things happen, emergencies and disasters, and it makes a lot of sense to store some food and maybe have some supplies and things. I'm like, well, yeah, why wouldn't I do that? It made sense to me. I didn't have any problem with that. My attitude was that if you're prepared for go camping or those kinds of things, well, then I could take on some kind of disasters. But I started studying things more and more and learning the kinds of things that could happen, and, of course, it turned into a profession. What happened was my real background and where we all started was in the cold weather and winter, because that's one of the things we were doing as a family. We would camp kind of year-round, but we would have a tendency not to go to the coldest of places in the winter. But it's like, well, winter happens, so we began snow camping in 1957. That was my first snow camp. In fact, there's a video of some of these things online, and I remember as a 10-year-old in 1957, hideous is what comes to mind. It was not a lot of fun. It was cold out there in the snow, but my father was my first best friend. He was my hero, my mentor. He wanted to go do those things, so I went along, and my mother went along. We started going longer, started going into higher mountains in the northern New Mexico mountains and into the Colorado mountains, and we were going colder, staying longer, and we were also suffering a little bit more, but we were gaining experience and getting better and better. In 1962, on a 5-day snowshoe trip into a wilderness area that had never been visited in the winter, we were pushing the envelope. Is the reality. Now, we didn't get jumped by any big blizzards, but as I look back and think about how we were doing things, we were using standard layering boots and socks and sleeping bags with extra blankets and double bags and all those kinds of things. And we were getting by, but we were pushing the envelope, and fire was absolutely required. We were using, fire all the time. We were doing it as a family. And when we were on our backpacking and snowshoeing trips, we had fire. We're in the forest, and you build fires. And as I describe in a lot of my cold weather classes now, and I have a picture of this, I played a game that Ron Popeil would be very proud of. I called it rotisserie. You'd stand around the fire and you'd just rotate around slowly, trying to get one part of you warm. You just round and around and around. I have played hours and hours of rotisserie, and that's what we were doing. Well, 1962, on this snowshoe trip, my father made a comment as we were coming out of the wilderness area. We were done, and he said, you know, we've got to find a better way to do this or stop going because we're not masochists. Now, he's an engineer, as I became one a little bit later, and I was, what was I then, 13 years old, I guess 14, something like that. He said, we just got to find a better way to do this. So he started thinking about what could I do? How could I do things? We had been listening to all of the mountain climbers, the military guys, the survival guys, reading the books, all these kinds of things, and seeing what they had to say. And basically what they said, and I still have some of these articles, they said, if you want to camp in the winter, you just have to be willing to put up with pain, misery, being wet and cold, and those kinds of things. That's a dumb idea because been there, done that one. So he said nobody else has an answer. They don't have an answer out there. We're doing everything they're saying with all the different layers, and we're trying waterproof this and that and different things. And so he said, I'm going to throw out everything that they're telling me to do, and as an engineer, what would I do to try and stay warm and dry? Because of the business he was in, the kind of engineering he was doing, he had access to some different kinds of materials. And one of them that we had that wasn't real common back then, but it was one that he had access to, was some open-cell polyurethane foam. And he looked at that and he said, I know this is a good insulation. I wonder if I could use it in clothing. And that's where it all began. And this thing that a lot of people talk about, and there's a number of people doing it. We just call it foam clothing. That's our trade name on it. But foam clothing using open-cell polyurethane foam. It began with footwear, or trying to keep our feet warm. And we found out that by making something that was very similar to an Eskimo mukluk, except we were using different materials, we can now have warm feet. Well, if you can have warm feet, what about your hands? What about your head? What about your whole body? What about sleeping? And over the next few years, between 1962 and 1972, an entire system evolved of how we would stay out there. Now, it wasn't just the clothing, although the clothing was a key part of it, but it was learning about nutrition and hydration and how to work with snow. And we had to experiment, how do you build an igloo and things like that. Finally, in 1968, this before the system was completely finished in 72, but in 68, I'm going into the end of the Navy. I've been in college, and the Vietnam War is going on, and I'm being brought into that. And we had talked about taking the ultimate winter camp, the ultimate snow camp, of going to Alaska. We'd been camping all over the Rocky Mountains and up into Wyoming and Colorado and Montana and places like that, but why not Alaska in the winter? That had been kind of a discussion we'd had. He was looking at the airline schedules and the maps and those things, and it was like, yeah, we can fly right into the heart of Alaska, but you know what? There are plane flights that go right to Point Barrow, Alaska, and that's almost 600 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And you just hop a plane and fly up there. Now you're above the Arctic Circle. So it's like, why not? We could, because we've been camping in the extreme cold down in the lower 48, so we could go up there. So our first Arctic vacation, expedition, whatever you want to call it, 2 weeks, unsupported, living out of our backpacks above the Arctic Circle in the winter. The coldest temperature we saw was 30 below zero, which isn't all that cold. The warmest temperature we ever saw was 10 below zero. So it ranged between 10 below to 30 below. And
wow.
In a cold soak situation, we're up there for 2 weeks living in this homemade clothing that we had, and no pain, no suffering. It was really kind of fun. But we learned some things up there, and we learned a lot of things from Eskimos we spent time with, too. We had some cultural exchange and some technology exchange that was very useful. So that's where it began. It was just a hobby. It was an avocation. And I was being asked back in the late 60s and early 70s to go teach little classes and things, mostly about cold weather and winter because people are freezing out there. I had a Boy Scout troop like I'd been a Boy Scout, and I took my boys out and we outfitted them so we could go live no fire, no shelter. We could stay right outside and be comfortable without injury. And it just kind of evolved from there, and finally I found myself in a situation, this would have been in 1980, early 84. January of '84, I had been laid off from a position, and I was like, okay, now what am I going to do? And I thought, well, why don't I just see if people are interested in cold weather and winter? And so I took my 35 millimeter slides and projector, got a free ad in the newspaper, and said, if you want to learn about winter camping and survival and those things, I'm just going to do a free lecture. And so 75, 80 people show up, and we do that 2 or 3 times. I say, well, if you'd like to have a course on how to do this, I'll teach it. And everybody signed up. We had like 85% of the people that came signed up for them. And so I thought, well, I better write the course. And so that forced me into actually producing the training materials and putting things together. And that was the beginning of the career that I've been in since 1984, which is teaching areas of what I like to call provident living. It started in cold weather, but it ranged out from there because as I started looking at some of the other issues, I was not satisfied with things that were being taught in the area of, water and nutrition and sanitation and shelter. There were big holes in them and or things that I recognized as not really being complete or correct. In some cases, they were downright wrong. So it just expanded both my research, my experience, and my instruction. And as we got into the mid-'90s, I ranged out far from just away from just cold weather and winter. It had mostly been cold weather and winter and things directly associated with that. But there were some real problems with what was being said about water and emergencies and about sanitation. Boy, that's a black hole that nobody talks much about, or what they'd say is very incomplete. And so I developed an entire system through the years of how I would instruct in all of these areas. And there's 9 of them that covers everything you need to know, do, and have, not just emergencies. I mean, every day of your life. And that was my way of organizing it because I had to get my head around this. It's the old story of how to eat an elephant. You look at the whole elephant, it's like, oh, my heck. But if you can break it down into components, into pieces, and you can take each one of them on individually, now it's doable. So for me, these 9 areas, I call them modules, works the best. And the 9 of them, very simply, it's foundation, clothing, water, sanitation, nutrition, shelter, wellness, tools, and supplies. Now, within those, of course, there's sub-components to them, and they're kind of listed in an order of priority. At least the first 5 are kind of in the order that will get you in trouble the first and the worst.
Right.
And so they're kind of in that priority order, and that's how I started teaching and experimenting with things, and it's just turned into a whole career.
Well, Jim, before we take a break, I want to tell a personal story, and for the listeners, I very, very rarely do this. First of all, I will not recommend a product that I have not used. That's the bottom line. Well, I've known Mr. Phillips for a number of years here, and last winter I was having some very, very serious difficulties with the place I was living at, and I'm sure most of us have gone through this, but every time I would call the landlord to fix the furnace, he'd be like, James, I'm going to have to raise your rent. I'm going to have to raise your rent. And this kept going and going to the point where I stopped calling him. Well, I was able to get a set of the PAL system, which stands for Phillip's Arctic Living System, which is the top and the bottoms, is what I was able to get a hold of, thanks to Jim. And let me tell you, this stuff works because it got bitterly cold in my house, and I'm very, very, very surprised the pipes didn't freeze up. I was having to use just a couple little propane heaters, but that literally, because where I was living at that point, it got down to minus 32 degrees outside. And so, Mr. Phillips, as I said before, you literally saved my life last year in the winter, and it's supposed to be even worse. I live in the Northeast, and it's supposed to be even worse. So I highly recommend the cold weather gear from Safe Harbor Alliance. Again, that's safeharboralliance.com. The other thing I wanted to mention is I was Googling cold weather gear the other day, Jim, and there are people that are trying to duplicate the PAL system One of them is in Logan, Utah, for 3 times the cost. So not only is yours more effective, it's also much more cost effective. And let's take a break here for a few minutes for our sponsors, and then when we return, we can talk about the importance of spirituality and preparedness, and why you feel personally your business model, you want to keep those prices low and educate and help as many people as possible.
And we are back with another edition of Disaster Survival Magazine's Weekly Radio.
With Jim Phillips from Safe Harbor Alliance. That's safeharboralliance.com. Jim has been involved in prepping for decades. Good friend of mine, Dr. Prepper. He refers to you and Barbara Salisbury as really the old guard of preparedness. You guys have been doing it. I refer to you as the grandfathers, the elders of prepping, which I mean with the utmost of respect.
Well, now I'm officially a great-grandfather, too, so by golly, I've been around here, and it's the way of life, these things, really. It's not a...
It is. It is, and this is what I say to people, when I tell them that I'm into preparedness, which covers everything from, being interested in alternative energy to homesteading to gardening. I mean, the list is very long. But I say, wait a minute, what did people do in the 1820s? Late 1700s, late 1800s. Early 1900s. Everybody had a garden. Everybody chopped wood. Had alternative heat sources. This was the norm. And now I believe we've become a 7-Eleven society. Everybody feels, you know what? Hey, I don't got to worry about this stuff because I could just run down to the corner store and grab a couple loaves of bread. Well, I hate to tell you people, but I've been through food outages where the trucks have stopped rolling, and even in my relatively, the town I was living in was relatively large. Within 3-4 hours, the stores were bare, and we're talking everything from the staples of milk, eggs, bread. People were just, it was really close to hysteria. So, there's just so many benefits to prepping. Let's just take gardening real quickly. You're out there, you're getting exercise. You can teach your kids about, gardening and the whole life cycle of plants. And you're saving money. Okay. Also, you're eating food that is 5 to 10 times healthier for you. It doesn't have, your tomatoes don't have a wax coating. You don't have to have all those terrible pesticides. So, anyways, this is about you, not about me. If you could, if you have anything more you want to talk about as far as your experience goes and the clothing, I also would like to hear as far as how important you think spirituality and community is in preparedness.
Well, just a couple of things real quickly. First off, the way I describe it is what we're doing is provident living. We're living providently. Living providently is about making provisions for the future. That's all. Some people say, I don't believe in that kind of stuff. It's all gloom and doom, what have you. And I just ask them, so do you have a spare tire and a jack in your car? Yeah. Well, that's provident living. Flats happen sometimes. Do you have insurance? Yes, that's living providently. Did you get an education? That's making provisions for the future. All those things are. So why not setting aside some supplies, because things happen. Food and the ability to take care of yourself and have some money and those things, and the longer the better, because sometimes things go on for quite a while. So that's my definition of what we're doing. It's living providently and making provisions for the future. The other thing on the cold weather clothing real quick is the way I describe it, and what you were using, if people go and take a look there, what you got was what we call the thermal johns. And it's a subpart of, as you described, the PAL system, the Phillips Arctic Living System. The real Arctic clothing is made with 1 inch of foam, and the half inch is what we use in the thermal johns. And the way I describe the thermal johns is that is your 2-year supply of heat for your house. Except we're not going to heat your house. It's not about heating your house. It's about keeping you warm inside of a cold house. And generally speaking, when you have shelter, that is a house that has windows and doors in it so the wind doesn't whistle through it, that inside of that house with a little bit of activity going on, I mean utilities are off, that it's still going to be above zero in that house unless you live in some real extremes and or if the house is damaged. In fact, one of the premier classes that I do that we're going to be filming is called Winter Without Utilities, and it's all about the half-inch clothing. It's all about how and why we do what we do, and it's how to make your own. You mentioned about the price. Our interest is keeping the prices as low as practical because people should have this, and if that's too expensive, I will teach you how to make your own. The heart of it is getting the right materials, though, because if you get the wrong materials or do things wrong, just because you have foam doesn't mean it'll work. There's a lot more involved in it, and that's what I teach in these cold weather classes so that you'll understand the principles, just obey the principles. So our interest is trying to keep the price low, and I've had some companies come to me that are trying to do this, and there's been a couple of them. They really want to hire me in the worst kind of a way, but because I've been doing this longer than anybody on planet Earth is the bottom line. This started in 1962, and I have history and I have documentation and magazine articles and books and all those kinds of things done on me and my father from the early 60s, and they'd like to have access to that as a part of their marketing. But the deal is what you have to do is stop teaching people how to make their own and take down all your stuff on the Internet. And it's like, I won't do that. So, we go our own, and some of these other people have had lots of money and they want to pay very well, but I'm going to teach people how to do it, because if you can't afford to buy it from somebody else, then I'll teach you how to make it. Because that's how important that I believe that it is, because if we lose utilities in the middle of winter and you have a house, it's going to be tough, and you're going to be living in your clothing 24/7. Mm-hmm. And this is the only way I know to do that. You had experience with that. You can attest to that. And I have literally hundreds, actually a few thousand people that can attest to that. And then if you need to be outside, I mean you're stuck outside, go watch some of the videos on our website. Talk about that for just a second. If you'll go to safeharboralliance.com, there's a short address. It's shprep.com, take you the same place. You go there and just click on education in the control bar. Go into education. You'll have two primary choices. One of them is radio, where there's a whole bunch of audio that's online, or go into video, and you'll see icons for the different modules I talked about, clothing and sanitation, water. Just click on the one on clothing and go in there and watch some of those. There's one in particular that's a blizzard interview with 6 Snow College participants. I spell Snow College, SNOCOL. Anyway, Snow College participants, and we were really lucky that year. We got jumped by an extreme blizzard, total whiteout up on this ridge. The temperatures are running just a little bit above zero, and we have 70, 80, 90-mile-an-hour winds, and we are staying outside. We're not in a tent. We're not in a snow cave. We're not in an igloo. We're outside. We're sleeping outside. I teach people how to do that, do it comfortably, and I filmed them talking to them about how's it going, and I'm back inside of a little snow house to protect the camera while I'm filming. They're sitting out there in the screaming winds telling how it's going on and what's been happening. Go watch that if you want to see what the extremes are. When you do it right, you don't have to be cold, wet, miserable, even in what would be deadly conditions. So anyway, we can talk more about cold weather and winter and those things, but there's a whole lot online, videos and audios that you can watch. You asked about spirituality and those things, and let's step back for a second here. When I said these 9 modules, I said the first one is foundation. Foundation is about principles, and actually each of the other 8 has its own set of principles. But the most important of the principles in foundation is what I call the law of provident living. I believe it's a law. I gave it that name, but it's kind of how I organize my thinking so that I be sure that I understand things. If I can understand it, I have a chance of being able to teach it. The law of provident living is very simple. It has 4 parts to it. There's an order of priority from the top down, And the key words that I use is, number 1, spiritual, number 2, attitude, number 3, knowledge, and number 4 is stuff. And it has to be in that order: spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and stuff. And from the spiritual standpoint on this, and we can get into doctrinal things and all kinds of things, I just want to tell people there's more to you than meets the eye. There's more depth of character, energy, future, possibility, hope. And you need to nurture that above everything else. Now, I'm a Christian, and I center my spiritual life around the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's just my bottom line right there, real simple. And I encourage other people to consider that also. I think, the majority of people may think that way. But even if you don't buy into all of that, please understand that there really is more to you than meets the eye. And you want to take care of those things. There are some absolutes in terms of what truth is and what is right in those things. You take care of that first, because that gives you a foundation to build upon. Otherwise, why the heck do you want to stay alive? Because I hear some people say, boy, if it really gets bad, if it's the bomb or something like this and this terrible stuff, I just want to die. I think that's a lousy attitude.
Yes,
that's
it
not,
is.
What's the purpose in doing that? So if you have a spiritual foundation, now I believe you have purpose in living, and that helps you develop your attitude, because attitude is the one that will get you through when things are really, really bad. It's your attitude that will get you through if it has a spiritual foundation. But how do you develop an attitude that says I can be okay no matter what? It's actually number 3 on this list, which is knowledge. Now, first there's the spiritual knowledge, and then there's knowledge about how and why things work, the principles of water and sanitation and nutrition and clothing and all of this kind of stuff and physiology. If you understand those principles, then you can figure out how to solve some of these issues. And once you understand those things, it's like you're going to get the right stuff at the right time. I see people worrying about lifestyle versus staying alive. And so they get some things out of order. They spend money in areas that it would be better to save that till later when you've taken care of the things that preserve life. Then you start looking at lifestyle and some of these other extra comforts. So that's my foundation law. I call it the law of provident living, and it is spiritual, attitude, knowledge, and stuff. And it's one of the things I teach.
And, Jim, one thing that I think is real important, I know I personally went through it, is it's interesting. You say, people say, if there's a bomb or something, I just would rather just die. And I know people like that. I think community is very, very important, because sometimes if you don't feel that you're worthy yourself of living, well, you know what, maybe you want to stay alive for your children or your spouse or your neighbors. I tried the lone wolf approach, and it doesn't work. And it can definitely lead to depression. It can lead to other abuses, and it really, it's not healthy. I wish some of the groups that I really have a huge amount of respect for are the LDS, the Amish groups, and they happen to be religious groups, but there's other groups that are non-religious based, but that still believe in the traditional barn raising. All the neighbors get together, or planting a garden. Everybody, the 5 families around, go to this person's house this day and plant that family's garden, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And that, I think, is very, very important. I think a sense of community is extremely important, because, again, I can personally tell everyone listening, I tried, the lone wolf thing. I'm ex-military, and I'm like, well, as long as I got my M16 and and my MREs and enough bullets and Band-Aids and beans, as they say, it doesn't work. And if you try that, you're at least in my case, you will fall into a depression, and besides, no one knows everything, and no one ever will. So the more people you can surround yourself with, so you can learn these different skill sets that you don't know, the better off you're going to be. So I think I think the community aspect of things is very important, and caring for others is very important.
It is. In fact, I've done several programs on that. We have a series of them in the radio programs in there about community. And it took me a while to figure that out because, look, I'm a guy. I'm a guy, and I have all this survival experience, and I've spent weeks, above the Arctic Circle. I've been up there 5 times. I've done all these things. So I've done some unusual things. So I'm like, I'm the guy. I can do all of these things, and that's why I used to think in the beginning, and it's about me and my family, which it is ultimately. But as I went along learning more, doing more, experiencing more, with the commitment that I'm going to have it all, know it all, do it all, be all things, I finally came to the conclusion, I ain't going to live long enough. I mean, I'm going to keep trying. It isn't like you don't try. So I started looking around and saying, you know what, I have flat spots in my knowledge, in my skills, and even in my personality. And what I need is other people that will fill in those flat spots. So I started talking about and teaching the concept very minimally back in the mid-'90s. And as we got into the early 2000s, it became more and more important. And so I finally wrote for myself the definition of community because, it takes you a while to describe it. Now, my background is engineering and science technology, so I kind of write it like that. But let me tell you what my definition of community is. It is a unified body of individuals bound together through agreed-upon common attitudes, character, interests, needs, fellowship, participation, work ethic, and commitments to the positive benefit of all. Now, at times, this community may be spread among a larger society, like mine is right now. My community goes border to border, coast to coast, and a lot of places in between because I'm traveling and lecturing and teaching, and I'm learning from others. So my community is large. I have the internet, I have the email, and I've got the telephone and all those kinds of things. But in the instance of significant hardships, the final qualifier of an operational community will be limited to those within practical, functional, working proximity of each other. In other words, how far can you walk? How far can you bicycle or ride your horse or whatever it is? It's going to be your neighbors, the people around you, and you need to develop those relationships with those people. Now, that's a conundrum because I run into this problem because I'm out there talking about building communities and somebody raises their hand in the class and they say, I don't know anybody that's like-minded. And others say that all the people in my neighborhood are scary, they're freaky, and if it goes bad, I mean, they're going to freak out. And they're asking me, what do I do? And I didn't have an answer, even though I sort of knew what it was, but I didn't characterize it until more recently. And I said, okay, this is what you do. So I'm going to give a commercial for somebody else. This is what you do. You go find, and you can find them on the Internet. You'll find them in your community. You just go out there and Google Citizen Corps or CERT, C-E-R-T. And you find those groups because those are people that are interested, and these are citizen-sponsored. They're completely controlled by us. We have a very active one in our little community here. You get involved in CERT training because you're going to find people there that are interested. Oh, by the way, CERT is Community Emergency Response Team. Now, it's very basic training. It's not into the extreme end of preparedness or things. It's very basic. But what you're going to find there is people that are interested in those things. You'll also find some people there that are very highly qualified and worth knowing. That's where you're going to start finding your people. Now, some of them may not be close to you, but you start bringing people to that because, hey, disasters happen, emergencies happen, power goes out, ice storms happen. That's when CERT comes out and is of assistance to people. Go get with the CERT people, get with Citizens Corps, and you're going to find folks there. So that's my advice on how you start doing this thing about building community because you will not survive alone, period. Not your household. You're going to do it in groups. And it doesn't have to be massive groups, 6, 8, 10, 12 families that can all work together. And the way I describe it is that you want to be a self-reliant family, self-reliant household, however you want to put it, self-reliant family, interdependent within a self-reliant community. And then to expand that further, you have these self-reliant communities, these little pockets of self-reliance that are now interdependent with other self-reliant groups, and ultimately you become self-sufficient. Some people say, I want to be self-sufficient. You never will be. You can become self-reliant and interdependent with other self-reliant people, and when you get enough of them together, Now then you have the dentists and the doctors and the nurses and the farriers and the blacksmiths or whoever it's going to take, because not everybody is going to have every skill, every bit of knowledge, and every bit of supply and information. You need a community. Build it. That's the biggest. Every time I do a class or presentation, I always end with build community, because you've got to have it. And if you go into the Safe Harbor Alliance, into education, into radio, and you'll find a alphabetical or a chronological listing in there, you'll find a group of programs I just rebroadcast that's all on community. There's 4 of them in a row. You want to understand community, go there. So,
well, Jim, let's definitely have you on again. We'll probably do a series with you on Disaster Survival Network. We're going to be really rolling out more and more podcasts, because I think it's a great media, because people can listen to them, whether they're on their way to work or, it's a very flexible media. So, again, I'd like to urge people to go to safeharboralliance.com. That's SAFEHARBORALLIANCE, one word, .com. And there's a wealth of knowledge on this site, and it's all free. I would also highly recommend people purchasing the cold weather gear. You can start off with the underlayer, which I have, which we will be doing a video review on within the next 30 days. And Jim, is there anything else you would like to let our listeners know about? We will definitely schedule you for another podcast, because I think sanitation is a topic that we should cover in depth.
I describe it as one of the black holes of preparedness. It's
right.
a dirty topic, and there's a little bit out there. Get some cleaner, sanitizer, store some toilet paper, what have you. But people are really not prepared for a breakdown. In fact, you can on the weather a DVD set that's on sanitation. I go out and do the free classes, as well as we sell some things so we can afford to do things free. But there's a 4-hour DVD set on sanitation you can get there. And if somebody wants to understand how we approach things or how I do, there's a $5 DVD. I mean, it's a 2-hour DVD, all principle-based. It's called The Foundation. We've been selling that one inexpensively for years, because I want people to start thinking about these 9 areas and focus on how you might do this, and do it based on principles, not just a list of stuff, because the stuff isn't going to take care of you, because what you know is more important than what you have. You need to have some stuff, but what you know is important. And kind of my closing statement is kind of my moniker, if you want to call it that. I ought to have it tattooed on me. Is this simple thought? There's no doubt that tomorrow will come, and there's no dispute that things happen. But how you're prepared to meet tomorrow will make all the difference in the world. If you're prepared for the worst, then no matter what happens, it will be an adventure. And you see, I believe in having adventures rather than miserable, struggling, awful, survival, painful, somebody come rescue my hiney kind of experiences.
Right.
Be prepared for, and that's why I look at things from a worst-case scenario, not because I'm in the gloom and doom, because I want to understand the worst and then do everything I can to prepare for it and hope it doesn't happen, pray it doesn't happen. If it does, I'm okay. If it doesn't, hallelujah. I just did a course on, I'm going to be doing another one here in our area, we'll eventually film it, on EMP and CME, and there's a lot of not so great information on that. There's a lot of confusion, and it's one of my topics I've delved into. And so that's one of those worst-case kind of things. And some people say, well, if that happens, I'd rather be dead. Well, man, you might suffer a lot on the way to dying.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I'm not into pain. I tried pain. I hate it. I'm a wimp.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I don't need luxury or a Ferrari or a Rolex, but we've had this discussion off the air before, and one thing I do want our listeners to know is that Jim is going to be working on a series of articles on dealing with the cold weather and how to, quite frankly, how to survive. We're also going to be trying to see if we can get him to do a column for each magazine that we do publish, because he's just got such a huge wealth of knowledge. The cold weather gear and the cold weather survival is just the tip of the iceberg. So, Jim, I really appreciate you being with us. Again, for our listeners, it's safeharboralliance.com. Jim, do you have an email that people could reach you at?
Yeah, you can reach me at jim@safeharboralliance.com. That'll come right to me. Or if you're looking at some of the products or have questions about things there, if you just do info at Safe Harbor, then other people can help you. But I'm glad to answer technical questions. It's part of what I do, and I may refer you to things that we've already published that you can find online, because I've got actually a couple hundred hours of things on there, and I refer people to them because you can get the full explanation. But I love to help people. The other thing I do is I do live classes in our area, but I've been from New York to Oregon. My position has been, if you will cover my expenses, I will go any place. My time is free. We hope you'll buy something, but my time is free if you cover my expenses, so I'm up to do those kinds of things. Of course, a lot of it we do over the Internet right now, which is nice. But I like doing the live classes, too, because I learn from people when I'm out there.
Absolutely.
And you can get register for a free newsletter on our website, and that'll bring you links to programs, and you can see our calendar and things like that. And I look forward to being back here. I'm glad you made it through last winter, James, because
you and me both, brother.
So glad you made it. We'll help people
yes.
get through the coming winters.
Definitely. Okay, everyone. We appreciate you listening, and we've been talking with Jim Phillips from Safe Harbor Alliance. We strongly recommend that you go out and take a look at safeharboralliance.com, and we will be having Jim on multiple times, and he also will be writing for the magazine. So thank you for listening. This is James from Disaster Survival Network, and again, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you soon. Happy prepping.